I'm we're live. So in the next 15 seconds, I guess I have the live on the other side. So all right,
Daniel, the host.
great. So everybody, welcome to the Green Reboot. So today we're gonna welcome to all of our speakers and all the people that are currently plugged in on the live stream. Thank you for joining us. So the Green Reboot is essentially how can the current crisis that we're living drive a sustainable transition in business. Why are we doing this today? It's because some people and organization have been calling for delays in sustainable transition due to the current pandemic, but while others have doubled down and are seizing the opportunity to pivot. So why are we seeing those two sides of the story happening simultaneously? To answer those questions, we gathered a small group of change makers from various backgrounds and expertise to address a crucial topic. What can we learn from the current crisis to support a viable and sustainable transition in business? We seized the opportunity of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which was yesterday, to announce and open the dialogue with speakers from coast to coast in Canada on this key topic. And I'm going to introduce briefly the speakers. Let me show up everybody. All right. So we've got Daniel Rotman, who works in waste management, EPRs, so extended producer responsibility and change behavior, live from Vancouver, Canada. We've got Tanis Osterman, who runs a sustainable consultancy firm, specialized in sustainable compliance, located near Winnipeg in Manitoba. We got Martin Nicolai, who's a youth leader for sustainability in business, based in Montreal. We've got Carmel Tanaka, who's working in cross-cultural in sustainability from Vancouver. We've got Kiefer McAuliffe, who works in online marketing for sustainable brands, located currently in Toronto. And myself, Daniel Jacob, I run a sustainable strategy consultancy based here in Montreal. All right. So the way this is going to go, I'm going to just pop up the questions on the screen. I'll let all the speakers answer those questions one by one. And so about 5 minutes. So briefly introduce yourselves, and then you can answer those questions as you see fit. So I guess, Kiefer, you wanted to maybe open the floor here.
Sure, yeah, I'll give it a go. Hi, everyone. My name is Kiefer. I've been doing digital work for about the past 4 years of my life, traveling to different locations. It started by freelancing, and now I have a marketing agency with about 6 full-time employees. One thing that you kind of address when you focus on agencies, there's a lot of misconceptions with how to manage employees, and you need employees in physical locations. So one thing that's come from quarantine in particular is a lot of companies are now realizing that they don't need their employees to show up to the physical office. And because of this lack of commuting and stuff like this, we've seen the air quality index drastically get reduced in developed and developing countries. Throughout my travels, I've seen different ways to combat air pollution because it's largely caused by emissions of cars, with traffic especially. People aren't getting to where they need to be. Philippines, for example, they have such a ridiculous tax rate on cars that only super rich can afford it at this point. Colombia, for example, depending on when your license plate ends, you're only allowed to drive for certain hours. So you have the car freedom, but you're only allowed to drive it through like 5 through 7 p.m. on Thursdays and Fridays. And these solutions are kind of a good way to tackle air quality, but you still go to these countries and they still have really, really bad air pollution, especially in hotter months. And now Paris, for example, just announced that their air quality index has been reduced by 52% over the past 1 month. And this is largely due to people just aren't commuting anymore. And how much of the people that are commuting to cities at this point from their urban sprawl locations can actually be working online. So what I would like to see more from companies is taking the motive of online agencies such as myself and adapting new strategies to realize, hey, maybe not everyone needs to be working from a physical office. And a lot of companies are kind of backwards when they deal with communications. They're still using Microsoft Outlook for emails. They've never even heard of Slack. They've never heard of all these team communication tools. A lot of Zoom is probably new to 50% of people that are required to use it over the past month. And why are these tools not being utilized? I'm a big believer that there shouldn't be a separation between environmental issues and technology. I really think technology is going to be the way that we combat environmental issues while we can still live a high quality of life without completely destroying the planet. And just from a simple standpoint, just less cars on the road. Why do we need all these cars on the road traveling north and south from an hour away, 2 hours away? So I think a really cool way to get the actionable steps on the table right now is why, after all this is over, do these people have to return to physical office? A large trend in Toronto, at least, where the city I'm living in at the moment, we're going to see that everybody's going to be required to return to office eventually. This work from home mentality isn't going to stay. And it's going to be a question of why at that point, because if it was working while quarantine was happening, why won't it work afterwards? And we kind of have to eliminate the mentality that a big office means your company is successful. There's e-commerce brands, tech startups that are reaching insane figures at this point, and they have no physical location, but they're buying physical location because there's a sense of pride that comes with it. And you're not legitimate until you have an office. But really, that office is just another waste of space, creating more emissions that's just 100% not necessary. So overall, the narrative towards actionable steps, it's quite simple. Just if you can work online, why not work online? There's no reason we should be forced to do otherwise. Dan, if you want to take it back.
All right. Yes. Thanks for this brief expose on what your viewpoint is, and I think that it largely comes from your experience in the digital marketing era. So I think that it definitely will have impact going forward, and we'll see how these actions can translate into maybe long-term habits, or at least drive change going forward. Second person that wants to step up and answer those two questions. All right, Daniel, here you go.
All right, here goes, guys. Okay, so I'll give a little intro about myself, and I'll go into the questions. So when I was studying my master's degree in conflict resolution a few years back, I wanted to make it my mission to engage in society's large multi-party and cross-sector problems. And so this brought me to the world of waste, where I now operate a consultancy at the crossroads of waste management and behavior change. And I've also been co-facilitating and developing the Master Recycler Vancouver program since 2015, empowering new and local waste reduction and prevention champions. I'm on the board of directors at SPEC, the Society Promoting Environmental Conservation, and I apply the psychology and sociology of behavior change with them to help them achieve their mission and vision. I also advise for the Plastic Ocean Foundation Canada and Refilter. So the narrative that I see in this crisis has two standout elements. The first is the imposed nature of the change on our lives, and how that reveals the second element, which is the power of context and environment on influencing our behavior. So I want to preface this by saying that, for many people, the crisis has brought a new or increased level of stress, and so it can be difficult, if not impossible, to see or realize the new opportunities that I might be talking about. But my hope is that in between the stress, there are moments of clarity where we can reflect on ourselves in a positive way, and I hope that this roundtable helps. There's an opportunity over and above everything else to practice compassion for yourself, your family, your neighbors, your friends, and everybody else in your life. Because for many people, change is something we try and avoid, whether it's change for the better or change for the worse. Change is difficult, and change can be painful. And so as a result, we don't get a chance to observe ourselves changing in action. But what now? We've got this chance now. A change has been forced upon all of us, and in sometimes a significant way. And so we get this opportunity. Some of us were driving into work, and now we're telecommuting with the kids at home. Some of us went to the gym to exercise every day, and now we need to find new ways to keep in shape. And those impacts go on. And so many of our behaviors have been changed without really, us wanting to, because of these environmental factors. And I say environmental factors because we tend to assume that receiving new information is what changes our behavior the most. But research shows that information by itself is never enough to change behavior. And I think that we can look to our lived experience now to realize that as well. So what does influence our behavior, right? So we have information, we talked about that already, but information only matters in the context of a relationship. And you can see this by comparing how information you see online might influence you differently than information that a trusted friend gives you. And the last part of that equation is the environment. So the place, the space, the rules in that place or space, they tell you if you're being unsafe or right or wrong. And so those things have a big influence on us. So likewise, somebody telling you an important piece of information in an environment that is very nurturing and very contextually relevant to the information, that will have an even greater impact. But the thing is that when we repeat behaviors often enough, they become habit. And that force of habit can also end up having a very large influence on us over top of the information and relationships and rules in our life. So what this means for us right now in lockdown is that many of our habitual behavior patterns are interrupted. And research suggests that we can actually leverage that to help us make new habits. And so why is that? And it's because our habits are in some way always linked to our environment. And so when there's a big change in our environment, like the COVID situation we're in now, or getting a new job or moving locations, our habits are affected as well. Essentially everybody's brain has been, short-circuited to some degree or not. And when this happens to us, we get a boost in terms of our brain's willingness to accept new habits in our life. So we want to change a habit and change a behavior. Here are some steps to doing that. But before we go into those steps, I want to first mention that the way we think about behavior change needs to be adjusted just a little bit, because we don't actually change our behavior. What we're doing in reality is starting a new behavior and letting an old behavior fall off to the wayside. So we start ignoring that old behavior while we build a new behavior pattern. And so what I'm going to talk about are 6 strategies that we can use to help us secure and start new habits. And the first is by creating a supportive environment for that change. And after I talk about the 6 strategies, I'm going to give an example using exercising. So the first is creating a supportive environment for the change. The next is you want to make that change, that new behavior, as easy as possible for yourself. The third is you want to create a cue or a trigger to do that new behavior. The fourth is you need to find some way to make it rewarding for you. And the more internal that reward, the better, because you need to train yourself. You need to be careful not to train yourself just to get that reward. You want to do the new behavior. The fifth is once you get a new behavior, you got to practice, practice, practice. Everything that you're good at now, you have to practice at some point. And the sixth is to make it meaningful. So let's put that into a concrete example. If you're finding yourself having to exercise at home, let's talk about how you can make that habit easier to adopt. So in terms of creating a supportive environment, you want to make sure that you have a dedicated space in your house to do this exercise. So that might mean moving some furniture around, create that supportive environment. In terms of making it easy, don't try and do exercises that are way above your skill level. Start with easy and simple exercises, things that you can do. In terms of making a cue, you might want to set an alarm with a friend and do exercises at the same time, because that way you can take advantage of the social influences on behavior change as well. And in terms of making it rewarding, is you want to set those bars, those different bars. And when you achieve those bars, give yourself an award that you feel is appropriate. But you also want to make sure to take the time and feel how great you feel inside in your body because you're doing this exercise. And in terms of making it meaningful, once you're able to get out into the world again, and now that you've done all this exercise and created a new habit, go and climb a mountain, but make that event meaningful by climbing it on your birthday. And that will also really help solidify this new behavior, this new intention to exercise in your life. So in recap, the massive change in our daily lives offers us a chance to start new behaviors and let older ones set aside. Because in status quo life, where we're all so busy and running around, starting new behaviors feels impossible and takes way more effort. But right now in this situation, as stressful as it can be, our brains are primed for change. And so let's use that opportunity to make some changes for the better now. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks a lot, Daniel. Very good expose here. this is like focusing on the people per se. So it's very let's say, what can everybody do to actually make a difference? So very interesting. Thanks for this.
Yep.
Maybe Tanis or Carmel? Tanis, there you go.
My name's Tanis. I own and operate a sustainability consultancy here in Manitoba. I've been doing this work for about 22 years. I have a degree in environmental toxicology and a master's in sustainability management. And I have seen and felt the shift from being the pariah in a conservative business group because you dared to talk about something other than traditional ROI, to being the pariah in the environmental movement because you dare to accept the fact that business has a place in our society. With those two moments, I feel that I can offer a certain amount of perspective on how small and medium businesses, some larger as well, but for the most part, small and medium businesses can sort of take stock of what's going on right now and how governments and general consumers need to respond to that as well. The three narratives, to use Daniel's words, that I have observed, and to me, that's just more of a contextualizing piece as for how we're going to frame our future actions. I'll give them to you one at a time, and then I'll suggest to you some of the actions that we need to account for. The first one is that government has demonstrated that they can move exceptionally fast when they need to. And the common monologue, especially for somebody, for a governing party, either at the provincial, federal, or sometimes even at the municipal level, says, we can't do that. We can't move the bureaucracy that fast to respond to X challenge. The implication for small businesses is when you have technologies, when you have services, or when you can identify problems that are either as a result of a changing climate or you can contribute to a solution as part of a changing climate, the government will sometimes step in and say, nope, we move a lot slower. Now, generally as a population, we don't want to see government move this fast all of the time. The speed, that slow speed, is that sober second thought, particularly here in Canada. But I feel like our MPs and our MLAs and our local officials, they're going to have a harder time saying, no, we can't do it that fast, because you've now just demonstrated that you can. So the action that I think we as consumers and small businesses and small business supporters need to take is to push on that, and don't let this example go away in terms of the speed with which government can operate. The second thing that I think is important to observe is that there has been within every jurisdiction, at least in Canada, and depending where your feeds are coming from elsewhere in the world, there is a focus on local, provincial, federal, or national capacity. And that's the capacity for economic and social resilience. That is the capacity to be able to respond to the pandemic in a way that protects public health, and capacity to demonstrate that additional risk factors are being accounted for in governance. And with that, I feel like we're going to see a bit of a shift in the pendulum where nationalism isn't as dirty a word as we like to take it now, where we acknowledge that pre-globalization, there were some benefits. And there are some cases where we did throw the baby out with the bathwater. So small and local business, for small and medium-sized businesses, for the consumer, I don't, like, to Daniel's point, I don't feel some of those habits and those behavioral changes are going to go away. I think from a purchasing, procurement perspective, we're still going to see, focusing on local work, developing local capacity, being able to shift to what the local circumstances required of me allowed me to extend my business. I think we'll continue to see that, and we should enforce it. We should embrace companies locally that can do it, while still acknowledging that there is value to doing things on different continents, and there is knowledge to be shared across the ocean. But it's not the be all and end all. We don't want to be stuck in a position where we have to completely rely on somebody else. The third thing that I'd like to note is, as somebody who's been doing this for a very long time, and somebody who, when you entered this field 20-something years ago, you had to have that science background behind you because it was the only thing that you had to validate that you knew what you were talking about. The way that sustainability and climate change in particular has been communicated in the last, I'm going to say, 3 years, has shifted from the broader sustainability communication to climate change as communication. And I think as professionals, if we want to see governments start to work with us on a green shift, to see consumers start to realize it's not all or nothing, because this has taken us back a little bit, and to promote small business interests, we have to be able to change the way we are communicating this. We have to get back to talking about climate change and climate action as it relates to broader sustainability. And we have to put a fine point on public health and safety and economic security, because these are not things now that people will forget. If we come out of the gates after this as a group of professionals and say, yeah, we learned all these lessons, now let's take climate change to the top of the heap, we know that has to happen. But the people that need to respond to us, the people that need to purchase, the people that need to vote, they need to know that their safety and security and their economic security is top of mind. We have to start drawing those links in a more stronger fashion for them. And those are the narratives and actions that I've observed in the last few weeks.
Thank you, Tanis. This is a really great approach to answering the question. So what I understand is that there's some proof of speed to reaction, especially from a government standpoint. So there is ways to react. More local consumption makes sense as opposed to globalization, and then change the way we talk about climate change. So I think these are three valid points that can definitely be put in place. I think that that is very valuable. Carmel, do you want to step up and give us your 2 cents on this?
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Daniel, and Changing Habits, for inviting me to join today's roundtable. Happy Earth Day and Happy Earth Week to everybody. My name is Carmel Tanaka, and I normally live, work, and play on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. However, I find myself riding out this pandemic on Okanagan land, and I look out my front window and it is snowing. So enjoy all of the cherry blossoms to everyone else. My educational background is that I hold a master's in public health, specializing in emergency and disaster management, along with a BA in Asian language and culture. I would describe myself as a community bridge builder, and my interests are quite varied, but generally they are social justice related. I have multiple identities and find myself most comfortable existing in the intersectionality of all of my identities, and that informs much of the work that I take on. So for example, as a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors and interned Japanese Canadians during World War II, I run a cross-cultural group called Genocide Prevention BC. I entered the world of heritage through my work organizing cross-cultural walking tours in a Vancouver neighborhood called Strathcona, which is home to Indigenous communities, as well as, but not limited to, the Black, Jewish, Chinese, Japanese, Italian, and Eastern Bloc communities. I also run Vancouver's local Jewish queer and trans group called JQT, which brings together Jewish and LGBTQ communities. Now, what's relevant to today's panel. Most recently, I was brought on to connect young adults in the realm of food security, sustainability, climate change, and the environment, specifically to approach these topics through a cultural and, for some, a religious lens. You have likely caught on that there's a common theme threading my projects together, and that is the building bridges between diverse communities to create something beautiful and to do something that's close to our hearts together. I share my background with you so you and everyone tuning in can get a sense of the lens through which I tackle all of my projects, and perhaps it is a different angle than shared by the other panelists today, and that is the importance of community and cross-cultural work in mobilizing people for a cause, and in this case, it's for Earth. To address our first question, what narratives can be extracted from the current crisis to help solve the climate emergency? I'm going to share some thoughts. They're not as well put together as some of my other panelists, but I think some of you can relate. Before COVID-19, I was feeling a bit of momentum, at least in Vancouver, on climate change awareness. And there is, in fact, a growing community of people getting on board to challenge the development of the natural gas pipeline through Wet'suwet'en territory. I can't speak to other cities in Canada, having not lived out back east, but Vancouver does have a reputation of being a rather cold city, in the sense that each community operates within their individual silos, and there's very little collaboration beyond one circle. Things were changing in a positive direction, perhaps because more people are seeing the negative effects of global warming and want to be more politically active, like marching down Cambie Bridge. Or perhaps it's trendy to care about the earth since there's increasing peer pressure to make you seem to care. Or perhaps it was Greta who blew away all of our narrow blinders. But for whatever the reason, there's been movement, and we need to harness this energy. I feel that this global pandemic has the potential to be an educational catalyst to teach us all the value of coming together as a community. I hope that this helps Vancouverites remember what it's like to be kind to your neighbor, to be a dependable community member, to help those in need, and how to be resilient during times of great difficulty. And this is exactly the time to be forming community, so that once we know more or less how to navigate this pandemic as individuals, as families, as social groups, and as organizations, we're in that phase right now. We can then begin with more capacity to expand our focus to include other areas that also need our attention. There's more than just COVID causing harm in our world. Besides, focusing our attention on something that is for the greater good of humanity and for the planet we all call home is a pretty rad cause, if you ask me. So we need a system overhaul in order to not revert back to what we had 2 months ago. Feels like a lifetime ago. And we need to keep the momentum moving forward. And this is where you, me, our friends, and our circle can help. Which brings me to question number 2. How do we translate these narratives into actionable items or steps? I have 2 recommendations. I talked about how education can be a catalyst earlier and wanted to elaborate on that for a minute. There's an assumption that people know a good deal about climate change, Indigenous peoples' rights, pipelines, and so many other climate justice related concerns. But the truth is that doesn't actually seem to be the case. And I myself am very much in the needing education category on so many items. So I say, let's take advantage of this time that we have at home to educate ourselves and read and learn, use our critical thinking skills as we read also the content, because not everything is true, and ask your peers. I'm sure you know people that you can learn from. For example, I'm lucky to be friends with Daniel Rotman, who is on today's panel, and I know he'll totally be cool whenever I want to pick his brain, and vice versa. Also, I'm virtually meeting the panelists today for the first time, and I look forward to connecting with them after today's panel to learn more about who they are, what they do, and to also have the opportunity to share what I do with them. So there's a lot of potential for significant impact for both self and peer-to-peer education, and I encourage everyone here tuning in to seek opportunities to do both. The second recommendation would be to identify those within your circle who are in your life and who are the glue that keeps everyone together, and who have this like certain warmth or perhaps a passion or charisma to bring new blood into your circle too. It's great to have big dreams of mobilizing an entire city, an entire nation even, but solving huge and messy global problems like climate change and environmental justice for us humans is simply a daunting task, especially if you feel like you're alone in doing so on a personal and local level. And you don't have to start big to make big changes. In fact, we don't do well with vague, open-ended tasks. I'm a firm believer in grassroots initiatives that you'll have more success starting on a smaller scale when you can successfully maintain a string of smaller wins that can be sustained over the long haul rather than reaching for the stars right away. And that isn't to say that you won't get there. Giving people steps that they can actually take today that are clear, specific actions is an important stepping stone towards systemic change. And of course, what those steps look like varies dramatically based on the overarching goal and the positionality of folks carrying out those goals. So listen, say you are the ideas person in your circle and you have an outreach person on board. You can do a great many things, even just starting out with 2 people. And also, bringing on and being open to collaborating with new people that you may not otherwise have done in the past will help you find the common ground you need in order to build a strong foundation upon and grow your community. This will likely end up being the hardest part. This is especially important when bringing on people from different communities with different values and priorities and beliefs. When it comes to Earth and sustainability, it's not so black and white. There's a lot of gray area and intersection between one's identity and how we relate to any one given issue. In order to accomplish things together, we have to have trust and to build that common ground and develop common goals. This may sound very simple, but it takes time. Sometimes it takes years to develop trust and relationships, so be patient. Rome was not built in one day. I leave you with one question to start percolating on, and that is, what's one realistic and achievable goal, big or small, that you can do to mobilize your community right now? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmel. That's very interesting, and also the bounce at the end for people to actually reflect on is very good. So what we heard is that you can bring different communities together to solve problem and bringing down silos. You can seize the current crisis as an opportunity to see who's around you and who can help you accomplish some of the goals you've set for yourself, and actually that these goals don't need to be so far-fetched or high in the sky, but you can start small and start creating action today. So this is very positive. Thanks for sharing that with us. Just before I speak up with my 2 cents on it, I think I'll pass it on to Martin here to give us his answers on the 2 questions that are at stake today.
Cool. Thank you, Daniel. Okay, my internet is a little bit shit, so just keep that in mind. Please let me know if there's any internet issues and you can't hear me. So my name is Martin. I'm 21 years old, so I believe I'm the youngest one in this group. I'm gonna try to keep the level still relatively high. So I am the co-president of the Digital Sustainability Network at McGill University. We're a student-run group looking to promote a culture of sustainable business practices at McGill and across Montreal, and empower the next generation of visionary leaders who envision sustainability as both an opportunity and a responsibility. I'm also a research fellow looking at communications for a sustainable consumption paradigm. So since my focus is really on the youth and communication side of things, that's really what I want to focus about. So just first to introduce and then we'll sort of dive in. I think what we're experiencing right now is truly unprecedented, and I'm a big believer that it is with a crisis that we can really create real change. So just keep in mind, I'm going to try to make this as reference heavy as possible so that you guys can go out and learn more about these topics. So definitely write some of these things down, and I'll also be putting out a list in the comments about some readings to do. So ultimately, it really becomes up to us to write the story of what we want to see. So I have a friend called Vianney Grasset, who is the ex-president of Enactus McGill, and he recently wrote a really great article entitled "The Donut and the Crisis." It speaks about the crisis through the lens of Kate Raworth's book, Donut Economics. I recommend that you check out the book and the article, but for a brief description, Raworth basically takes a very holistic view of the world and the economic landscape to promote a model for a new kind of economics that sustains humanity, all while respecting planetary boundaries. The goal of the article is simply to understand from the response of governments, business, and simply people around the world what is going on and how we can move forward. So there's a few points that I want to put forward in this article. First, it's that governments have intervened. So if you look at what's going on, Spain's hospitals have been nationalized. Governments around the world are stepping in to support the newly jobless. Denmark basically froze its economy. So this seems to be a recurring theme in similar crises, including the 2008 recession. Governments step in, and that's just something to keep in mind. We can't tackle climate change without governments. So this neoliberal sort of thinking is always talking about like making government smaller, but the idea is really not that. It's government has a place. Second, the market is not all terrible. It has yielded some really great things, and there's countless examples of companies as big as L'Oreal, and I'm the first one to call out L'Oreal and some of the things that they do, but you have to give it to them that even LVMH have been stepping up, and even small companies, startups like things like Plasticpreneur, who's an Austrian startup that are doing really great things to help, and there's even plenty of hackathons around the world that are taking place, including the Pan-European Hackathon this weekend, which you should totally get involved in. So if we look at this and try to analyze it, this could be potentially another push for companies to get away from the model of maximizing shareholder value towards a model of maximizing stakeholder value. This is where things get a little bit tricky, and this is really where it starts coming into the youth perspective. There can only be a real shift away from a shareholder maximizing model if employees are able to push for it within companies. We know young people want to lead more meaningful careers, but young people also need the skills and the knowledge to make this a reality. We need education to translate our convictions into actions, basically. So this puts forward two calls to actions that I have for you guys, the viewers. So first, we need to get involved, and we need to push our universities, especially business schools, towards giving young people these skills. So, be vocal. If you're a student, be vocal. Second, because this change is going to be slow, we also need to make sure that students right now have the knowledge that they need. I'm going to plug an organization that I'm a part of right here. We created the Canadian Business Youth Council for Sustainable Development, which brings together the 8 most active student groups from across Canada to share best practices and allow youth to learn from Canada's experts on all topics related to sustainable business. We were just featured in a list by République, which is a purpose-driven marketing agency, which puts forward 20 statements about the state of sustainable business in 2020. So these spaces are really good places to start to understand capitalist reformation and get educated about it. So I definitely recommend checking out the Youth Council, but also checking out that 20 statement list with all the hyperlinks. Something else to keep in mind that we've started seeing with COVID is there's going to be a lot of people that will not want things to change. Billionaires are currently giving away lots and lots of money to make sure that things go away, and they're also making sure that their brands look great in doing so when they're also treating their workers super unfairly. I think of Amazon, for example. I recently read an article entitled "The Ultimate Gaslighting," which puts forward the idea that companies will do everything they can to make sure that people start buying and consuming again after the crisis is over. These are things that we should all be keeping in mind when the recovery phase of the crisis is going to start, and that really need to be addressed. So in my opinion, I think we need a push and a pull strategy similar to what we've already seen in sustainability, but leveraging the current situation. And I think we really need young people to hold these large companies accountable, but we also need people from all sectors to help these companies transition, because this doesn't happen overnight. We need to figure out a way to bring them to the table, to scold them for what they've done, but to still help them make a transition. And I think now more than ever, anyone who's working in a company, be them a young or an older person, they have the potential of being a social entrepreneur. And I don't mean entrepreneur, I really mean intrapreneur. I think any young person with a job right now has the opportunity to go to their managers and basically tell them, you know what, you guys are really struggling right now, we are really struggling right now, but this is the opportunity to rebuild the right way. So let's not screw this up, and, band together with others and start a conversation. If you work for L'Oreal, this is the crisis, to go and do things differently. So, I want to leave with one last reading to do. There's already a lot there. But one last reading that really influenced me in trying to understand what a better world could actually look like, it's a piece by John Fullerton, who's a systems thinker, and it's entitled Regenerative Capitalism. And it basically proposes a coherent rethinking of society. And I think this is the kind of paper that we need to be, reading during this time. So definitely check all of that out, and, stay active, try to learn as much as possible, and just be vocal about what you want.
Thank you so much, Martin. This is a very good perspective. What I hear is that government has a play in making a difference. The market is reacting to a changing demand that is becoming more sustainable. That we are changing the paradigm of a paradigm that of the maximizing shareholder concept versus maximizing stakeholder, which includes citizens and clients, includes shareholders, but also all the stakeholders that interact with organizations, and to finally to push the universities and school to embed sustainability concept in their curriculum, something that you and I have talked about in the past also, and that is still not necessarily the case, and presents a huge opportunity to kind of embed those narratives into the thinking, so that it becomes common, not common knowledge, but common interaction or narrative. Now, let me take the stage here for the last person to discuss on my 2 cents on those two questions. So my name is Daniel Jacob. I lead a sustainable consultancy firm here based in Montreal, Changing Habits Solutions. This started as a world tour to highlight all the initiatives that were run by different individuals and organizations across the world. And from my experience, I could see that basically there's ways to embed sustainability in your organization's strategy in a viable way. So we got to change the narrative that sustainability costs money to narrative can drive profit and is profitable to engage in. So to answer the question about today, what narratives can be extracted and how do we use those narratives, I'm going to approach the answer from 3 angles. And the first angle is first to start with a little story. I was having a chat with a client this week, and this client is based in Canada and is in a city that doesn't run or have a stringent regulation on recycling, let's say. And this client works in construction services, of which basically the disposal of waste is one of the service that's being offered. And recently he had a conversation with one of his clients, and he said, look, I'm going to try to embed some sorting at the construction site. Would that be an option? And he was expecting to get no, or it's going to be difficult, or a lot of pushback. But for once, the client actually said, no, let's try it out. I think it makes sense. And his quick observation was that for the first time, he sees that a lot of his peers and clients are willing to start experimenting change and change in a sustainable way. So he's actually observing that. So what comes out of it? So what's the narrative that or the actionable step that comes out of it is that we can see that the crisis is now disrupting people's daily habits, and which makes people and organization unusually ripe to embrace change and to start making change to their operations. And for example, before, a lot of companies were saying that remote working was impossible to do, and then suddenly we see a tremendous amount of companies who quickly pivoted, given the current crisis, into making this possible. So the bottom line is that for a lot of people in organization, this is prime time to try out new things, to try out new strategy, and to concretely put to practice some of the sustainable initiative. The second angle to answer those questions is first, that the pandemic is showing that being proactive is vastly less costly than being reactive. Now, we don't have yet the cost per capita of the reaction in Canada of the pandemic, but we know for a fact that the Canadian government is spending somewhere between $16 and $20 billion a month in only the financial support. So the CERB, or the PCU in French, and that's not counting any loss of from an economic standpoint. In the US, it's probably higher. Now, take, as opposed to that, Taiwan, who has a population of about 24 million people, but have managed to avoid any lockdown since the start of the pandemic, driven by immediate proactive series of steps. Now, why is this pertinent? This is pertinent because the same is happening with climate change, but it's happening over a longer period of time. And the fact is, most organizations today don't even know what risk they're facing with climate change, and have even less the potential to quantify the impact that it would have on their organization. So in the addition, these proactive initiatives would allow them to have the time to put those initiatives in place before things like a pandemic happen, and then you're forced to do it in hush mode and reactive mode. So what I'm saying is that the cost of being proactive about climate change, as it was for the pandemic, for example, is a tiny fraction of the reactional cost that organization will be facing if they don't prepare right. The third angle is that the pandemic showed us that this is the first time in human history that the entire population of the planet has a common goal that's not fighting each other. And for most of us, people not at the front line, and thanks for them being on the front line, in the healthcare workers and everybody that's still working out there. But for most of us, it comes down to the sum of our individual actions, which is social distancing. So we can see from that pandemic that the narrative is strong for individual action actually making an impact, which is flattening up the curve. Now, why does this matter? Is that if we apply the same principle of individual action to solving the climate crisis, we will wind up having the same effect, which is flattening the curve of the climate crisis to prevent tipping points from happening and reaching planetary boundaries. Now, how do we do that? As individuals, we have ways to create an impact. First, by changing our own habits, so our daily habits of like water usage, waste, recycling, composting, producing at home, public transit. There's many ways that you can have individual impact. And then what you can do is, once you've changed the way you do things on a personal level, is to influence what happens at your workplace. So when you decide to apply the same sustainable mindset at work, you can find ways to reduce the environmental impact of your organization while still being profitable. And I think this is the power of the current pandemic. Now, in conclusion, for those who have managed to ensure their basic needs right now is the time to start educating yourself on what sustainability means for you and your organization, and start to identify the financially viable initiatives and actions that are relevant for you and how to implement them. These initiatives, like Carmel said earlier, these initiatives don't have to be dramatic change. They can start small. The only thing is, start small, but start somewhere. And I believe this is where the most of the pandemic can actually drive positive change. So this ends, say, all the question part of this panel. I was wondering if there's anybody on the line that have any questions that they can ask the panelists that are here, that we can answer from any angle that everybody has been talking about. We've got about 10 minutes left. So if there are any questions from the audience, that would be the right time to do it. And in any case, I'd like to maybe ask the panelists at some point, if there's no questions coming in.
Daniel, can I just make one comment?
Go ahead.
So I agree fully, and with Carmel's commentary as well about the capacity for individual action. But to go back to my earlier statement, I don't think that we can forget why it was so easy, quote unquote, to bring an entire world together on a common problem and have them act appropriately. It's because the majority of the world believes that their personal safety is at risk. And until we as sustainability professionals can change our communication strategies to allow people to still ensure that basic need is met, like on Maslow's hierarchy, until we can give them permission to care about the climate, to care about sustainability, but within the context of their personal and public safety, I don't think we would see mass globalization or mass global effort to the same scale until this climate change crisis is in fact right in their face. And by that, I mean of the Western white world.
I definitely agree to that. When you start hitting some fundamental about people, basic needs, I think this is when you definitely create a reaction that has some good positive action. Now we have some questions coming in. One from Patrick Duke. He says, how can we inclusive of oil and gas with this new world as we transition to a low carbon economy as voters? So, and as sustainability consultants, so how can we drive a different narratives? Is there anybody around the table that can take a shot at this one?
I'll take I don't know, as voters and as sustainability consultants, I think that we need to be more inclusive of the values that we bring to the table. And I think when I say that, I mean to reframe our goals into things not just in environmental values. I think that it's easy to take that frame and that lens, but that's not the lens that everybody shares. And so I think in terms of making sure we're inclusive of oil and gas with this new view, I think it just means that we need to put that into the context of balance within overall society. And I'll say that right now, I think that the way in which we approach oil and gas is in a fairly unbalanced way. It's in an uncontrolled, ever expanding way. And I think that we just need to bring the reins in so that oil and gas exploration is, while it's still necessary, is done so in a more safe and sustainable and balanced way within the rest of the energy mix in society.
Tanis, I think you also had a comment here.
There, sorry.
There you go.
I agree with Daniel's comments, and I would just like to add that this goes back to, and this is now getting on a little bit of a tangent, I do feel collectively as sustainability professionals, I am shocked at the number of people coming out of school who don't have that core ecological scientific knowledge. I applaud the communications people, I applaud the IT people, I applaud all of the people that cover all the areas that I don't. But without that scientific basis for why we do some of these things, I feel sometimes our message is getting a little bit messy. And oil and gas, I believe, is one of those cases. So when I said that, I've gone from being a pariah in the business environment to being a pariah in the environmental movement, getting called a pariah in the environmental movement came from saying, hey guys, there is a place for oil and gas. And the reason I can say that is because in all ecosystems, all we're dealing with is carrying capacity. Natural carrying capacity, that doesn't change. So if we shift our oil and gas efforts to the high value like our plastics and our medicines and the things that we can't really replicate, instead of just burning it, I think that's the place that we can do that. But we still have to say, yes, nature has a carrying capacity that can absorb some of this. She just can't absorb as much as we've thrown at her in the last 100 years. So to give you an example, I do work in northern Manitoba, northern Saskatchewan, northern Alberta, not Indigenous or reserves, but rural communities. So a lot of agriculture, a lot of folks where they're driving huge distances. There's a lot of pride in those F-350s, F-250s. I'm a farm girl, married into a farm. I get it. And I actually don't care how much I don't care about your F-150. I'm not going to tell you in northern Alberta or northern Saskatchewan, you should definitely buy a Prius. That's a stupid thing to do. However, if we're looking at your total emissions footprint and knowing that there is a carrying capacity per person, and we're the most wasteful people in this country on the planet, keep your F-250 and make the reduction elsewhere, right? So to start allowing people some of that personal agency to make those choices themselves and not feel like because you agree that the oil and gas sector can exist, because you cannot in the next 18 months shift your entire personal world to be devoid of oil and gas, either investments or actual use, you're still a good person and I still like you. I think we have to get to that point. And I do really strongly feel that the pendulum, like for as much as there's way too much money and subsidy and just lack of oversight on oil and gas sectors across the world, I do feel like from an activism perspective, we've let the pendulum swing just a little bit too far in the other direction. And I know, again, if I had any social media presence whatsoever, this would probably come to kill me. People would be very upset with this commentary. But I, like I said, 20 years and I primarily with a rural focus, we're not going to get the global and national movement that we need until we're bringing those folks on board. Because no matter what, everybody in Toronto is still one vote. You've still got votes in all these small towns across the country.
Completely agree. I mean, that's a great way. And that reminds me of Kiefer and I have been talking about the same kind of approach to veganism and vegetarianism, where it's like the shaming of people who still eat meat in the same way that people still use gas. The idea is to start small, but to start somewhere and not be perfect, right? It's the shooting for the moon and the perfection that nobody can relate to. So if you start with small actions, then you can and be accepting other people limitation and situation. I think this is how you actually move the needle. Thank you for both your input here. Jen had a comment here, and she says currently economic system is in denial about the true cost of business as usual. If we can frame sustainable approaches as saving money or making money, maybe capitalism will listen. And I totally agree. This is the narratives we've been trying to have at Changing Habits Solution is really to have the triple bottom line approach. And in the triple bottom line, it's people, planet, profit. Well, in that triple bottom line, there is profit. And I think this is a very good narrative to have, is to speak that same language. There is a tremendous amount of solutions out there that are pertinent, that are financially viable. They just need to be presented in that way. And this is the approach that we've been trying to have, and kind of like enlightening people with the fact that this exists, the financially viable, sustainable solutions. And this is the narrative that we've been trying to have. So obviously not everybody will be able to listen or willing to listen, but I think this is the right kind of the prime time as people are kind of being remolded and kind of like shaken up and disrupted in their habits. That's probably now the right time to engage in this narrative.
Yeah, Dan, can I chime in?
Yep.
Sorry, just to go on that. So coming from an ethical marketing standpoint, when people are given A or B option, they always choose the more eco route, but oftentimes people are just misinformed on what the more environmentally friendly route is. So the idea of marketing things behind saving money or making money, these e-com businesses or businesses in general, they'll always continue to do fine, but a lot of the time their message is kind of buried underneath the sand. And right now, when you're dealing with a global crisis such as COVID, this is the time that these marketing platforms can kind of stand above everything else. And we can utilize this opportunity to be like, hey, you should be buying more ethical route for a million reasons, but now more than ever, we got to support a community as a whole.
Good comment. Yeah. Anybody wants to step in? All right, we're fast approaching the last minute, so I just wanted to thank all the speakers for joining in today. I think this is a first step. This was organized last minute. I basically hijacked or basically cornered all the speakers 2 days ago, and Tanis's case yesterday. So thank you for the quick reaction on this. It in my case gave me a good opportunity to put some pants on for the first time in the last week. So that's very positive. No, but jokes aside, I think this is a very important time to know how to rebound and to utilize the current times that we have to reflect on what are the best strategies to come out of this, to not go back to business as usual, but to drive new narratives. I was reading an article this morning published in a newspaper about how the Canadian government is putting a task force on trying to put together a kind of a coming out of the pandemic in the right way approach, and hopefully something positive will come out of it and concrete actions. But I think we're definitely heading in the right direction. So I want to thank also the people that have been following us during the live stream. If you have any questions, you can email me for any of the panelists or the speakers. You can either directly reply to the invite on Eventbrite, so the ticket that you received, the email confirmation. You can reply directly on that, or you can send me an email, and I'll make sure that you're put you in contact with the right people, the right speakers. Yeah, thanks for all of you for joining in today, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Happy Earth Day.
Bye.
Yeah, happy Earth Day.